Indian in the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks, Chapter 6. The chief is dead. Long live the chief. He got to school early by running all the way. The first thing he did was to head for the school library shelves for a book on Indians, and to his joy he soon found one under the section labeled Peoples of the World, a book called On the Trail of the Iroquois. He couldn't take it out because there was nobody there to write him down for it, but he sat down then and there on a bench and began to read it. Now, Omri was not what you'd call a great reader. He couldn't get into books, somehow, unless he knew them already. And how, his teacher never tired of asking, was he ever going to know any more books until he read them for the first time? And this, On the Trail of the Iroquois, was not exactly a comic. Tiny print, hardly any pictures, and no fewer than 300 pages. Getting into this was obviously out of the question, so Omri just dipped. He managed to find out one or two fairly interesting things straight away. Iroquois Indians were sometimes called the Five Nations. One of the five were the Mohawks, a tribe Omri had heard of. They had indeed lived in long houses, not teepees, and their main food had been maize and squash, whatever they were, and beans. These vegetables had, for some strange reason, been called the Three Sisters. There were many mentions of the Algonquins as the Iroquois enemies, and Omri confirmed that Iroquois had fought beside the English while the Algonquins fought for the French sometime in the 1700s, and that both sides had scalped like mad. At this point, he really began to get interested. The book, in its terribly grown-up way, was trying to tell him something about why the Indians had done such a lot of scalping. Omri had always thought it was just an Indian custom, but the book seemed to say that it wasn't at all, at least not till the white man came. The white man seemed to have made the Iroquois and the Algonquins keep on scalping each other, not to mention white men, French or English as the case might be, by offering them money and whiskey and guns. Omri was deep in the book, frowning heavily several minutes after the bell had rung. Someone had to tap him on the shoulder and tell him to hurry to assembly. The morning lasted forever. 3 times his teacher had cause to tell Omri to wake up. At last Patrick leaned over and whispered, "You're even dreamier than usual today. What's up?" "I'm thinking about your Indian." "Listen," hissed Patrick. "I think you're putting me on about that Indian. It was nothing so marvelous. You can buy them for a few pence in Yaps." Yaps was their local newsagent and toy shop. "I know, and all the equipment for them. I'm going shopping at lunch break. Are you coming?" "We're not allowed out of school at lunch unless we eat at home. You know that." "I'm going anyway. I've got to." "Go after school." "No, I've got to go home after school." "What? Aren't you staying to skateboard?" "Omri, Patrick, will you kindly stop chattering?" They stopped. At long last lunchtime came. "I'm going. Are you coming?" "No, there'll only be trouble." "I can't help that." "You're a twit." Twit or not, Omri sneaked out, ran across the playground through a hole in the fence. The front gate was kept locked to keep the infants from going in the road, and in 5 minutes, by running all the way, he had reached Yaps. The selection of plastic figures there was good. There was one whole box of mixed cowboys and Indians. Omri searched till he found a chief wearing a cloak and a full feather headdress, with a bow in his hand and a quiver full of arrows slung across his back. Omri bought it with part of his lunch money and rushed back to school before he could be missed. He showed the chief to Patrick. "Why get another Indian?" "Only for the bow and arrows." Patrick was now looking at him as if he'd gone completely screwy. In the afternoon, mercifully, they had two periods of handicrafts. Omri had completely forgotten to bring the teepee he'd made, but there were plenty of scraps of felt, sticks, needles, and thread lying about the handicrafts room, and he'd soon made another one, much better than the first. Sewing had always bored him rigid, but now he sat for half an hour stitching away without even looking up. He was trying to achieve the patched look of a real teepee made of odd-shaped pieces of hide, and he also found a way of bracing the sticks so that they didn't fold up every time they were nudged. "Very good, Omri," remarked his teacher several times. "What patience all of a sudden!" Omri, who usually liked praise as much as anyone, hardly heard her. He was concentrating so hard. After a long time, he became aware that Patrick was standing over him, breathing through his nose rather noisily to attract his attention. "Is that for my Indian?" "My Indian, yes." "Why are you doing it in bits like that?" "To be like a real one. Real ones have designs on." "So will this. He's going to paint proper Iroquois ones. Who is? Little Bear, that's his name. Why not call him Running Nose? Asked Patrick with a grin. Omri looked up at him blankly. Because his name's Little Bear, he said. Patrick stopped grinning. He frowned. I wish you'd stop this stupid business, he said peevishly, going on as if it weren't a joke. Omri went on looking at him for a moment and went back to his bracing. Each pair of sticks had to have another short stick glued between them. It was quite tricky. Patrick stood a minute and then said, Can I come home with you today? No, I'm sorry. Why not? Mum's having guests, Omri mumbled. He didn't tell lies very well, and Patrick knew at once it was a lie and was hurt. Oh, all right, then, be like that, he said, and stalked off furiously. The afternoon ended at last. Omri accomplished the walk home with normal dawdling, which with normal dawdling took half an hour. In a little over 10 minutes, he arrived sorely out of breath and greeted his surprised mother. Have you developed a jet engine, or have you been expelled? With a lot of gasping and a request to go straight to his room without waiting for tea. And I am going to stop there, because literally this was the 8th attempt to record this chapter, so I want to have some of it up before I finish. Sorry for the editorializing, and there are several parts in there where I probably would have started over, but I am sick to death of reading this part of the book over and over again, and there is a lot of exciting stuff to get to. So this is what you get for the beginning of Chapter 6. I will see you at the back half of Chapter 6.